Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and I'd like to welcome back my special guest from that great American city, Chicago, Tom Amenta. Happy to have you with me today.
Hey brother, what's going on? How you doing?
Well, I had a great Easter weekend. Everything was wonderful. I got out to play a little golf, got to church, brunch, the whole Easter thing. Got to see some friends. Everything was great. And then, like you and I talked before show, you get to visit some friends. So, I mean, it sounds like we all had a nice Easter weekend. And then we wake up this week, and folks, the headline of the show today, I've got to spell it out for you. Transgenders, race, abortion, guns, crime, and war. Tom, what could possibly go wrong with a headline like that?
Oh my.
And I haven't even talked about the economic issues, but seriously, that was the easiest headline, folks, I think I've ever had. I'm just looking through the news stories, and boy, the week started off horrifically. My hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, a place I'm very familiar with. Some lunatic comes in there who had no prior criminal history. Guy had a master's degree from an undergraduate and a master's in finance from University of Alabama. Quiet, collected, never caused any problems with anyone. Wakes up one day, goes into a bank, kills 4 people, wounds 9 other. And then, Tom, apparently the guy bought the gun legally a week ago.
Yep.
And, the governor of Kentucky and Senator Rick Scott, one of the people killed was their own private banker. I mean, this really touched people's hearts and the political leaders more than the random thoughts and prayers type situation. Tom, advocates are out there again, the gun control stuff again. This guy bought the gun legally. How do you explain something like this? I mean, the guy just literally became suicidal and decided to take out 4 people at the bank.
Well, and you just highlighted it. And this is the uncomfortable conversation that people don't want to have. Look, I am, me, I'm down the middle. I am very pro 2A. I have never liked, and this is a great example of where I get on my soapbox. He just walked in and bought it. Okay. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being for the national defense. Well-regulated means trained. Okay. And it is time for the right to start having this first conversation. And that is the truth of anyone who's ever been in my job, being in the military and all that other stuff. It's like, you don't just hand someone an M4 or a 240 or anything and say, go on. You train them, you drill and you train and you practice and you demonstrate competency and proficiency. Kudos to the right and getting the interpretation of 2A where it is in terms of guaranteeing the access to a firearm. I believe in that. But we've got to stop acting like just randomly grabbing this, that's the right. That's not actually the right. The right is you can have it and you're supposed to be trained. So that's my first soapbox, where it's because you just highlighted it. This guy did everything legally, but he was suicidal. He was depressed. And so everything was fine. None of these other red flag laws or anything are going to work, right? He did it. But the second thing, and this is where everyone on the far left needs to start realizing that there's another amendment problem around stories like this they never want to talk about, is start finding ways to black the media out on this. Okay. Because what happened 2 weeks ago? Same thing. What happened last week? Same thing. There is a cluster when these things happen, because you said it. He's suicidal. He's depressed. He's deciding that he's going to go out. Well, he's going to go out in a ball of flames. He's going to go out, in a way that makes people care about him, that gets his name out there, and you see this over and over and over and over again. I worked in safety and security consultancy for schools, and this is one of the things that you try and teach people, the signs look more stuff, but the truth of the matter is that we know the profile, and it's not a surprise anymore. And it's the fact that we keep venerating these people, we keep, all the clicks and all the media and all the hey, they see this as an avenue for fame. They see this as an avenue for positivity as they're going to go out. Like, this is how they're going to get their name out there.
Yeah, I think
so. That's another conversation that needs to be had too. Like, it's not one side or the other. Both sides have got to start seeing that the things they love so much, that they hold so sacred, right? That compromising some of that in order for that safety. I know some people say it's dangerous, and I'll hear the left on that, but it's like, on the right, like, it was never you can just have a gun. It's not, the Lord did not, like you said, you went to church, like, the Lord did not decree that every person could have a firearm. If he did, we'd be born with them literally out of the womb.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, I got to push back on one thing you said. When you talked about your first point, how people need to be trained. I mean, this guy had no criminal record.
Right.
Had a job. I mean, no indication whatsoever. And when, I guess a week ago, when he went in to buy the AR-15, I mean, the gun shop owner had no idea the guy would have been suicidal. The gun shop owner would have had no idea the guy had problems with where he was going to get fired at work, which allegedly is what's happened. All the training in the world. I mean, whether the guy had any training or no training, he went into a bank and fired and killed 4 people. And then the irony of it is, Tom, he came out, apparently, according to the police reports, and waited a minute and a half, and then the police came and killed him. So, I mean, I don't think there's any law that.
Yeah, well, here's what I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Help me out a little bit, because I'm trying to. I'm just saying.
No, because
if you buy it legally, are you saying we should change the law, or what? I'm a little unclear what you're advocating.
I want the laws to change that. You can own it, but you have to demonstrate that you trained with it. You have to demonstrate competency. And I'll push back a little bit about, you couldn't own. Well, if this guy buys it, right, and then he goes to the range and does a 30-hour training course with it, in a small group with an instructor, you think that instructor, if they're worth half a bean, isn't going to notice something, isn't going to be able to demonstrate proficiency, demonstrate competency, demonstrate that you understand the tool with which you're working with. There's one more opportunity right there for someone to go, this might be a problem, right? It's one more demonstration to know that this person has it and is going, is demonstrating responsibility with it. If you're suicidal and you're like, I'm done, the odds of that person, existing in that range and existing in a course like that in the same way that you or I would, right? It's one of the things with 9/11, for example. One of the things they looked back in the 9/11 report was they always said they didn't care how they were going to land the plane. They never cared about landing. They were always like, how do I get it in the air? How do I keep it stable? How do I, and the instructor was like, you guys got to practice landing. Like, nah. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a certain thing of your mind is going to tell you, it's going to have a direction. It's going to have a place to go with things like that. And it's one more chance, it's another thing where it's like, if you had that, suddenly the concept of a red flag law makes a little more sense, right? I know that's more of a slippery slope and you can push back on a certain thing, but it's like, if you're having this graduation from purchase to to competency demonstration to, if you're going through that chain and you see it maybe something should be said, right? Suddenly it starts making a little more sense where you have a firearms expert who sees an unsafe act or sees some behavior, that at least it starts the conversation. At least maybe you get it. But right now, if you decide to do what this guy does, there's nothing you can do to stop it. And the only thing you can do.
Advancement of social media, Tom.
Yes.
I mean, you're more of an expert on that side of the equation than I am.
Yeah.
I mean,
it seems
like with the increasing participation, I guess is the word I'm looking for, of people in social media, that when I think you hit the point when you said these people become suicidal and they think, well, I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory. If they're suicidal, their mind obviously is not thinking right. So do those factors coupled with the social media, exponentially.
Yes, they absolutely do. There's on the Atlantic, and I cannot remember who the author was, and I apologize for that. He wrote an article that was talking about essentially the lost boys, like the angry, narcissistic male profile that you see that historically does things like this and how they're sort of slipping through the cracks in society. I will find it. I'll send it to you and the production team so you can include it in liner notes after the show. It's an interesting and fascinating look at like the mind and the persona of this. But social media is just the gasoline on all of these fires, right? Like the shooter in Louisville live streamed this.
Yeah, right. That's
Mark.
Yeah.
Like he's like, like little, I turned my camera on, and then that's the attention seeking behavior that I'm talking about. That is the problem with this veneration of this and our culture that is so thirsty to talk about it, to put all the ink and all the video and all of the other things, that it's like, you take that profile that's and you give them a platform, right? And you're going to see more and more of this. Like this is not going away. And the fact that we refuse to, it's always about the gun. It's always about the gun. It's always about the gun. It's always about the inanimate object. No, it's about the person, and it's about what their goals are, and it's about having a reasonable safety net in place. In my opinion, I think a lot of that comes down to training to be able to evaluate. Again, like, I could go on forever about it because again, like at the end of the day, if you have competency, if you have I'm also I will say, if you can show competency and you can show training, I suddenly get super 2A. Like, oh, you're good with it. I don't care if you have a machine gun. Like, the standard's going to be higher. The demonstration of this, like the need to show responsibility is going to escalate with different weapon systems.
Yeah.
What problem is there?
Yeah, this is not an easy one, Tom. And I mean, I'm not trying to go one political spectrum or another. It's just, God, this is happening a lot in society. And boy, it's a whole different, I hate saying it, but it is a whole different world now than 20 years ago because you didn't have all these things. And I think they're all contributing. Let me move off of it because we got a lot to cover today. Shortly after that, I'm sort of tying in, in Tennessee, 2 House members got expelled from the Tennessee House for demonstrating, and their issue was, the events of Nashville that took place. They were kicked out, and then the City Councils, one I think is in Nashville, one in Memphis, wanted them to fill on a temporary basis until the next election. So, Tom, what is going on in Tennessee? I mean, what's that all about?
This is the thing where sometimes if you have the leverage hammer, it's not always the best idea to swing it. Like, okay, so they protested. Okay, they felt like they had a point. And obviously it's an inarguable fact at this point now that they've been reinstated to those roles by the local governments that they were serving their constituents. Like, that's the problem with the American discourse for me right now. This is what this is in a nutshell for me. It's like, you don't like what someone did. So rather than try and work through it in the legislature, rather than try and work through it in why are they doing this and what is it that they represent? You've got a supermajority on one side of the aisle. So you're going to use it with no thought, with no discussion, just, we can do this and you did this thing and we're going to do it. And now look what happened. They look like morons. Like, I'm sorry, everyone in this situation looks like a moron. It's like, so, okay, well, now they're back and they can't do anything about that because their political, rules maneuver just got outmaneuvered. And there's, at least until the next election, it's like, this is, I mean, we've had this conversation on the show many times before. It's like, this is where discourse matters. This is where, even if you don't agree with someone, use the process the way that it's intended. Use just because you have a rule, well,
I hear your point. Your point is maybe suspend them, discipline them, but kicking them out. In other words, they went to the extreme as the first option.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, they nuked them and then they got renuked.
All right. Let me go to my next social issue because we're in agreement on this one. I got a problem with the next issue, big time.
Okay.
Chino, California, an 11-year-old girl transitioned, I guess that's the buzzword, transitioned,
right.
Wanted to be a guy with school assistance. The parents didn't know, and there's some law, parental secrecy policy. I mean, when I saw this, I'm like, my first reaction was, how could the parents not know? I mean, doesn't the parent talk to talk to the kid. I mean, how was your day in school? What your teacher? I mean, well, and then I thought, regardless of whether they did or not, the fact that parents weren't notified this was happening to their kid in the school, that is a not only sickening situation, it is frightening. And no wonder, I sort of a lot of times, I take your approach to some of these social issues. I say, well, if it's not affecting them, just live and let live. But this one, changing someone's gender at 11 years old when they barely know who the hell they are anyhow, I mean, Tom, that's wrong. I mean, that should not be taking place.
So let me start, and just so your audience has everything on me. Whereas there's some things I'm super far right. I mean, how many times you and I have talked about fiscal policy and everything like that? I go way over to the left when it comes to LGBTQ issues. I have a ton of friends that identify as queer. I am so pro that side of the aisle. And honestly, whether you choose, like we were talking about, you going to church, whether you choose to believe a certain religion or you don't, our Constitution says explicitly that we separate church and state. So whatever your opinions are there, the fact that I constantly see something boil down to Jesus doesn't like it, that's why we don't like you, in governmental policy infuriates me. So with all that to say, what drives me absolutely crazy about this, and this is the perfect example of this facet of it, is that the psychology of the human mind is understood in childhood development. And at 11 years old, even if you have all your prepubescent hormones raging, you still don't identify gender properly. Okay, like now that's a super tricky thing that we do not have time for and all that other stuff. So like I'm going to skip that part of it just because, we'll talk about that later if you want to. The child's mind is not developed enough to understand what they think they want and understand the gravity of that decision. That is just psychology. Okay, period. Now, you want to talk about someone middle of puberty, post-puberty, if they're under 18, like with parents that are really, really unsupportive, there's a very gray, ugly, murky conversation that no one gets out clean from. But for this case, at 11 years old, the child does not have anything. They're not a teenager. They're not rounding into the person they will be. So I'm totally here with you. Like the fact that it's just a law. There's a level of common sense and human decency at some point. And to me, I completely, this is actually one of those, I completely agree with you on this story. Like, and usually I hear that stuff and I'm like, but I mean, this is the parents have to be included. You cannot tell the parents of an 11-year-old child that they have no say in their child's development. You can't also where's the school psychologist? Where's the school board mental health professionals going? They're not cognitively developed enough to really understand what this is. Like, that's what bothers me so much about this, is that there's also really interesting, and some of my queer friends don't like it when I point this out, but there is a group of people that parents sort of push their children to this way sometimes. There's also a lot of parents who are super unaccepting, which is equally not okay, right? Like I'm not saying that one is worse or whatever than the other, but it's like there is this sort of subculture that's very small, but it's still very kind of like a Munchausen syndrome when it comes to this issue that layers on all top of all of it. It's like it's not that clean, and the fact that this is an 11-year-old child who does not have the mental capacity cognitively to understand the decisions they're making, and other adults are refusing to tell the two adults or that should be the most in their life that they have no say in it, is just mind-boggling.
Well, the insane thing to me is this parental secrecy policy. I mean, it's the state effectively telling parents you don't have access to, the state's going to control this. I mean, if there's not a better advertisement to put your kid in a private school, I don't know what is, because that to me, that is just insane.
Yeah.
And staying on this for a minute, on this, this, I guess the transgender issue. Okay, so I'm saying on that issue, I'm to the right. But on this next piece I'm going to talk about, I'm sort of to the left. And I'll give you my point. I'm seeing this story about these well-known entertainers, conservatives. I'm not going to mention their names. Okay, they're slamming Anheuser-Busch over, apparently they've been advertising to attract there's some trans activist that Bush hired,
Dylan Mulvaney.
Bush hired. I've never heard of the guy. I couldn't care
Yep.
less who he is. And, I guess they're targeting that audience. That's what advertising is. For whether your political view is far left, far right, or it doesn't matter. Advertisers will advertise because they want to target a certain percent of the population.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where I guess I'm going to use the word fake outrage. It happens on the left. It happens on the right. And all these guys, a handful of well-known entertainers that have huge followings are coming out saying, they're firing guns at Anheuser Bud Light cans. They're just saying we're taking this off the bar. And I'm just saying to myself, who gives a rat's ass? I mean, if you really are that taken back by this ad, don't drink the damn beer. There's hundreds of beers you can drink. But Tom, I'm sort of taking the libertarian approach to this one. Why is this an issue?
Because we were talking about social media earlier, because it gets attention, and if you want to radicalize your base and you want your people to go, yeah, in this case, like, yeah, America, because this is a super far right thing. Because over on the left, like, I was seeing a story where Dexter Holland, who's front man for the band The Offspring, which I grew up listening to, like, the SoCal punk rock, he's like, it's now in our rider. So like when they get to a venue, the things they expect, that there has to be Anheuser-Busch products waiting for them in their dressing room, because it's the exact other side of it. It's like, I'm totally with you on this. This is one of those where it's like, this is a nothing argument that people who have a platform that are trying to get more revenue from their core audience, and they're just using that as an excuse. It's like, I find it as such a nothing. And honestly, Anheuser-Busch, I know some people that used to do marketing for them. If they have the demos, they clearly understand that there is a market. And again, like, me, super, super into that capitalism thing. It's like, hey, good on them.
Right. I none of that stuff. I mean, I'm just like, if it offends you so much, quit drinking the damn beer. I mean, this is maybe I'm too simple, but I think you used the word a nothing burger on this one, and I completely agree with you. I mean, to me, I'm like, oh my God, there's so many other things. Next. God, what did I do here on these headline issues? 2 appellate courts, sophisticated judge. You don't get to be an appellate court judge panel if you're not a fairly bright person, okay? 2 rulings on this abortion pill thing, totally opposite. One is okay, one's not. And then, of course, you have the knuckleheads coming out on the left and some on the right saying, well, like the AOCs, well, we need to disregard what this judge said. Oh, really? Is that, you're a member of Congress and you're saying disobey the laws? What kind of credibility do you have? And then, ultimately, I'm guessing the Supreme Court will decide this issue, because if 2 federal appellate courts, one says yes, one says no, somebody, unless it's purely by state issue, I don't know. Tom, help me out with this one.
So here's my problem with the ruling in Texas, and I actually ran this by a friend of mine who's a lawyer. This would be, if this is ultimately upheld, his ruling, it will be the first time when it comes to consumer safety for like pharmaceuticals and things like that the FDA has said, no, it's good, and the courts have overruled it. Okay. It's a tricky thing. There's actually a lot of sort of nuanced problems with the Washington State one as well. Like both of these, I would say that this is the judge legislating from the bench, and that is not okay on either side.
I agree.
But whereas there is some nuance to Washington trying to make this a state issue, which I think is murky. And honestly, I'm going to bore the audience if I go down that road. Anytime that you are breaking truly new judicial ground, and you're doing it on maybe the most hot button divisive issue in the United States, I'm not giving you the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm sorry. Like, the FDA came out and said, no, your concerns are not valid, and here's our research. And he said, nah, I don't care. That's my problem here. Like, again, I could go.
I'm with you, Tom. I am with you 100%. I'm in the same camp as you. I've said this forever. I mean, look, if people look at voting patterns and age and demographics, and I'm going to make a politically incorrect statement here that a lot of conservatives are not going to like, but in election after election, if you start off pissing off half the population with your policy, and you're a male, and it's not all men, there's a lot of conservative women too, that is a losing issue. Okay, I've said it forever, and I know a lot of conservatives aren't happy to hear that, but if you want to keep losing elections, keep championing that anti-abortion stuff. Okay, I'm not advocating one way or another. To me, I think if the woman's choice is that's her own body. Okay, I'm not going to tell someone to do their own body. But when you try to legislate, like you mentioned, legislate from the bench, man, I don't care whether it's from the left or the right. I don't think that's good. And
to me, that's the frustrating thing is that it's this nuclear, radioactively toxic issue that is getting all the headlines. And to me, and I'm like, no, this is one of the clearest concerning legislations from the bench that, as my friend said, he goes, that America has seen in 50 years.
Yeah.
You know, my buddy's like, this is black and white, and this is not like, there's no precedent for this. No. That's my concern. And the fact that it's around this other issue that everyone else wants to get the ink, it's like, no. I want to know what made you, as the judiciary that's supposed to be impartial, do one of the most partisan things that has been seen from the bench in 50 years. Like, you got to go back to like civil rights stuff. And it's like, that's my concern here. And that's not okay. It just happens to be this issue. Yep. That's my concern.
And moving on, if we haven't hit enough social issues today, the next one, this one's pretty easy. Okay, Whole Foods. They go to San Francisco, open up a nice, beautiful store. This part of San Francisco, folks, where this store is nice, was nice. Within 1 year, they're closing the store. Why? Crime, drug addicts, homeless. I mean, Tom, if this isn't a microcosm of what's happening in some of these deep blue cities, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned right now because Chicago just had their election, and Brandon Johnson won.
Yep.
Once he got past Lori, he went from progressive to hyper progressive, and he painted himself against Paul Vallis, who was very moderate, borderline conservative, at least in sort of the modern political climate or the way that the left would paint it. He beat Vallis. So I'm wondering how those vague campaign promises are going to come to fruition here in Chicago.
Well, you're going to host the Democratic convention in 2024, and again, I know. I mean, not criticizing the city, but you and I've talked about. I mean, it's effectively the murder capital of the United States. I mean, you could under Lightfoot again. Maybe it'll change, but normally when you go from progressive to super progressive, that's not exactly the way to get crime under control.
Yeah, and that's I just say that because I'm concerned about that here, but it's like when you look at San Francisco's always been hyper progressive, and you want to know what? Like, I think that there are some things that reasonable people, clean needle share programs, and some of the other things that piloted there, I think that you can say that they're a net positive for society. But what you can't say is that all of this, we're going to ignore little crimes, right? And you saw a bunch of this in Chicago until Lori got her head put in the proverbial vice by decision makers. Is like, no, you need to do more. Those things are like, you can't chase off the Whole Foods of the world, right? You can't chase off these sort of, especially for that, like culturally relevant, money-making operations, and expect there not to be a poor result. And that's where, I think that, at some point you've got to say, like, we're going to a crime is a crime and we are going to prosecute it. Now, it doesn't mean that you got to slap the max on somebody. I think that there's, between sentencing guidelines and, some other things, I think there are ways to not have it come off as super harsh, which, I'm prepared to have a conversation on. But if you keep ignoring it, all you're going to do is give someone the opportunity to elevate, their attempt until someday, finally you're going to, come down on it. And at that point, it's too late.
Well, it gets to a point where more people are going in the store and just stealing stuff and walking out with it. You can't stay in business. I mean, it just won't. And all these people that argued, well, they don't serve the minority community. The hell they don't. They put a store right in the middle of San Francisco, and boom, it illustrates a bigger issue that, again, you just hit on. In these deep blue cities that are trying to out-progressive themselves, it's not working. I mean, look at Portland, Oregon. I mean, the classic case. San Francisco. Look what happened in New York. I mean, look, it's like you're going to lose the tax base, and then the city will implode. I mean, we have history of this happening over centuries, and yet, it continues. It continues. I don't know. Okay, so now we've gotten through transgenders, race, abortion, guns, crime. I got to close it out with another. This story hit me, and I'm like, U.S. spy operations capture Egypt trying to sell weapons to the Russians? I mean, Egypt's supposed to be our friend. Tom, this isn't supposed to be happening, okay? You were part of the military intelligentsia.
So I mean, I was in special operations. I was a ground pounder for the Ranger Regiment, but we did hear a couple of things. I just wasn't an active intelligence collector. I just want to make sure that the audience knows that. So
okay.
Egypt is always kind of been a frenemy. I mean, if you really look through their history, the fact that we have been supportive of Israel as we have been, like the Golan Heights, some of the other land that Egypt has long tried to hold claim to. It's kind of gone back and forth. I'm not surprised that they're trying to nibble around the edges a little bit, especially because the Chinese are putting an intense press on Northern Africa and try to gain more influence there as sort of a way, also with Iran as a way to, move into the Middle East, sort of counter American, Saudi relations and, some of the other things there. So I'm not surprised at all. The more concerning thing for me on that leak is where did it come from and nobody knows. And that, because like if you look at the story, it wasn't just normally the way they find people is because it's like, okay, well, you have this tranche of documents and they all came from the same office or they all came from the same area, right? Like these look to be broad reports from multiple different places, which means that they had to probably come out of someone super senior's office or someone just got lax with the Ukraine because it's moving so fast and like they got into one system and suddenly they have it all. That's what worries me is that this isn't an easy one to look at to plug because this really could be some junior level staffer who was putting document packets down in front of senior policymakers and stole one.
Right.
I mean, like, again, there's ways to find stuff like that, but it's still like,
this is bad. This is bad for the country.
Yeah,
what's happening?
It is.
Yeah. I mean, it
absolutely is.
Folks, this is not good stuff. When sophisticated intelligence is leaked, that hurts our entire defense apparatus.
Absolutely.
You know that for sure. How about the Chinese situation here? The president of Taiwan, she comes here, has meetings. It was not an official visit, but U.S. delegation going to Taiwan were official visits. And now, what does China do? They surround the island, and then they have a simulation for how to attack Taiwan. Put it right out on the internet for everybody in the world to see.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, look. There's a point right now where the opportunity cost of continuing to support the Ukraine as aggressively as we have. If the Chinese decide that they want to ratchet up their drills around and their saber rattling and their threats to attack Taiwan, that's a way to sort of put U.S., NATO, Western at large interests in a bit of a box, in a bit of a bind. And I think what you're seeing is that every time that there's a Western Taiwanese relationship on any level, you're seeing them rattle the saber more and you're seeing them rattle it harder. And I think this is going to continue. I think that the cost of freedom is high, and you want to know what? This is part of it. And I don't have a great answer on a lot of levels for a lot of different things. But I do think this is going to get murkier and a little trickier before it gets better because China has, they've got the weapons. They've, what I'm saying? Like if they really want to try and push that, but they also have an economy that you can't just sanction. They also have all these other things where they have so many tools in their toolbox that if they decide that they want to keep rattling the saber, and see what the reaction is.
How much of this do you attribute to the Biden administration? I mean, you mentioned Saudi Arabia and a U.S. ally. That was true under Trump, but boy, not as much under Biden. I mean, how much does the perception of a weak U.S. president filter into all this?
One of the things though is that I know that some people, and this is going to rile up maybe some people, but Trump wasn't seen as a particularly strong president when it came to foreign policy and it came to foreign relations. So, he did some good things, especially, in North and South Korea, and, say what you will about Khashoggi and some of the other things with Saudi Arabia, but he did make it a point to try and protect American energy interests. That's for sure. Right. But there are other, his response to, most of Western Europe. I mean, I can go through, like, he was not considered in a lot of places particularly strong either. I think that what this is more of is that I think the Chinese think that we and the West are distracted by the Ukraine, and I think they're trying to figure out just how far they can push something.
Yeah,
I think that is.
I agree.
I think that is now. They might have some intel, or they might have a gut reaction that Biden can be pushed around a little more than a Bush, or even like Obama was very quietly one of those people that was like, don't think for a second, I won't let it off the chain, because he very quietly did a couple of times. So I think of those two presidents as more recent ones where I think that the Chinese would be a little more reticent to do some of the things that they're doing. But I really think at the end of the day, it boils down to the Chinese recognize that the Western world is distracted and they want to see what they can get away with.
Well, I think they're going to weigh the risks of what they could do with Taiwan versus their economic risk. And my gut feeling tells me the economic risk of doing something with Taiwan greatly outweigh the benefit of the status quo with the Chinese. That's my perception right now. Listen, we got a minute or two left. I'll just close it out with two things, Tom, and let's give you the final word. I did see some news. 58% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. That's troubling, concerning. And then today, Biden very quietly signs a decree, whatever it was, that basically ends the COVID-19 emergency. Tom, there were a lot of people that when this happened in January, February 2020, didn't know if we'd ever get to this day, but we did. So well, I mean, COVID's turned into the flu, basically, right? And I think that that's where the virus went. That's fine. If you choose to believe what you're or not, there's vaccines available. So as far as COVID goes, to me, it's like I just treat it like a flu. And anyone who can't see that, we've evolved, that we have put the tools in place that were not available at the beginning of 2020, and you want to keep making this an issue. Well, I'm sorry that your life is that sad. Yeah,
if I'm being really honest.
I'm with you on that. I mean, they did it quietly. Okay, fine. Most people have been living their life normally for an extended period of time. All right, Tom, go ahead.
I was going to say, now, as far as the 58% paycheck to paycheck, I think that, again, like you and I love talking about economics. We love talking about these things. Like when people are talking about like why inflation is so important and why this has got to cool down and why there needs to be some pain and why too much free money in an economic system is bad. This is just one more of those data points, right? Yeah. Americans aren't particularly good with our money. We're not particularly financially literate as a nation. And, we can talk forever about that if you wanted to, but like at the end of the day, when Jerome Powell keeps saying, he's going to keep doing these things, and then you find out like an SVB just took some bad bond notes, right, and made some bad bets. Like this is what happens, and is
an issue I could go on for. I could do an hour show just talking about that. Some of the investments they did. I mean, they teach you that in Banking 101, and they violated those rules. Tom, it was an easy show today. I mean, transgenders, race, abortion, guns, crime, war. I mean, it's Tuesday and oh boy, I got to tell you folks, and add that in with the economic issues in the country. And I'm sitting here saying, if I'm Joe Biden, do I really want to run again? He says he's going to, but he hasn't come out yet. I don't know. I mean, I just look at this. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating political year coming up because we've gotten through the crazy season, and I think we're going to have so much to talk about. Just issues like that alone, boy.
Oh, yeah.
It brings the country together talking about this stuff, doesn't it, Tom? Tom, thanks.
Halfway there.
Halfway there at least. Again, I'm more to the right, you're more in the middle. I think on most of these issues, I was pretty much in the middle with you today. Tom, thanks for your opinions. As always, I know I can count on you. You never hold it back, one way or another, and I want to thank you for joining me on a issue-friendly day, shall we say.
Always good to talk with you, my brother. I look forward to doing it again soon.
Okay, we'll talk soon, Tom. Hey, folks, thanks for dealing with us today. A lot to cover. Be back on Thursday. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening. Stay safe. And as always, we will cut through the propaganda. See you in a couple days.
So really quick.